Some of the leading cable producers are actually capacity constrained at the moment, and also that we have some of the same issues in North America. So again, we'll have a look at that, try and understand what's happening. So I'm going to do a brief presentation on kind of the global industry, and then we'll drill in on some of the data. So we'll have a look at the world economy, what's happening there, and I think one of the other things is what's happening now is normally it's the world economy kind of drives the cable industry, but actually we've got politics is kind of having an impact. We're going to have potentially an announcement from the US President this afternoon on his views on the Iran nuclear deal. I'm sure some of the CEOs we have on the panel will tell us how politics in the GCC is impacting them. And then we'll look at some of the world cable markets, Middle East, and just some conclusions. So I guess I've shown this some previous presentations where basically we think the shift in oil prices, we had oil at more than $100 a barrel a few years ago, meant that this region had a lot of money, governments could spend money on infrastructure. You then had the fracking boom in the US, caused a kind of a cap on prices. So we kind of see this global shift between the developed world and the developed world economies having this big tax cut effectively, and the Middle East region where oil revenues are important for government spending. And now, of course, we're seeing a slight shift. We're seeing kind of political uncertainty and higher oil prices, and I'm sure we'll hear about that over the next couple of days. But again, we just see it's kind of a shift. If you think about the global rest of the world outside the Middle East, very strong now, and we'll look at some of the numbers versus the Middle East, where we'll see and hear maybe Saudi and others are weaker markets, and there's issues with capacity. So this is an index that we track very closely, very useful kind of tracking the global industry. We can just see, if we look at the industry towards the end of last year, we saw very, very strong numbers. This is the global, all of the manufacturing PMIs, that's purchasing manager indices globally. You can just see it's lost a little bit of steam. We'll have a look at that and why that might have happened. But we can just see the market globally kind of was on a turning point, kind of June 2016. All the numbers that we see, lots of indicators. It might even be Caterpillar's revenues from construction kit. You can see Caterpillar were negative, and then by the time you get into this period here, Caterpillar suddenly is seeing very positive growth. So lots of people are suddenly switching into fixed investment phase. And once you get into fixed investment, then you get a lot of demand for cable. So again, very, very strong numbers globally. Obviously, this includes some of the Middle Eastern numbers. Just look at this. What is this showing? This is actually, this kind of generally green area is showing that all the developed world, this is up to December 2017, you can just see this green here is actually telling you that in the developed world, it's all turning very, very positive. And what does that mean? These strong green numbers, 54, 55, and once you start heading up to 59, 56 for a purchasing managers index, that starts giving you kind of inflation or bottlenecks in the market. And so if I'm sure you'll chat to other colleagues here, and they'll say, well, actually, we can't quite understand why we're at capacity on certain products. We found that in the States at our conference a couple of months ago. People were just finding fixed investment was kicking in. The emerging markets, again, not as solid. You can see places like Brazil, this red, it was in recession, it's slowly picking up. And again, you can just see Taiwan, but generally not as strong in emerging markets. And it's this very, very strong area here, the Eurozone, North America, even Greece is kind of finally coming out of its slump. Again, quite useful just to kind of visualize the global economy. If we actually drill in, we can just see some of these Northern European economies. This is a PMI again, and this is up to April. So this is the kind of latest data we have. I mean, we could have tried to plot all the main numbers, but we don't actually have all the data in. But you can just see, once you're heading up to kind of 59, 60 in Germany or the Netherlands, that's very, very strong numbers. And we don't see this kind of level normally, so we don't see these levels sustained. So it just gives you some idea of how strong it is. Some of the weaker markets, you've got politics here, having an impact on South Korea and on Turkey. Again, so politics does have an impact on the PMIs, which feed through to people deciding to invest, and that has an impact on the cable industry. So again, generally, at a world level, again, as I said, it's still expansionary. So at the global level, seeing more solid. Just some latest data. I couldn't actually get the complete data set downloaded, so I've just pasted it in. But it's actually just showing you the trade policy. So we saw very strong numbers. If it's above 50, it shows you that trade is growing. And we can just see the impact of China, just some concerns politically. And we're just seeing this slight downturn since some of the tariff announcements, or basically really not the actual announcements, it's then kind of the uncertainty in that space where people say, well, we'll just hold off a little bit, or we'll make a decision. So again, you can just see politics is actually having an impact. This generally strong trend upwards for world trade and the world economy, and just this slight pause, which again has had an impact on sentiment. We saw sentiment in the States very, very strong kind of into January, February this year, but we've just seen concerns about some of the impact of tariffs, and actually maybe we'll chat later today. We'll have some discussions maybe about what happened with Russell and why that had such an impact on the aluminium supply chain. So these are just some of the growth numbers. Again, very strong. We'll probably just skip through that. You can download this data. I think the main point, I think we showed this before, that actually 2016, this is the volume, the year-on-year change in volumes of cable at a global level. Obviously, this is the Great Recession, which you all remember. But actually, at a global level, in 2016, we actually saw an absolute decline in cable shipments. This is the volume. So it just shows you, particularly H1 2016 was very, very tough. And then we saw this kind of this turning point around June, July 2016, and actually we're then into this territory now where we're seeing stronger growth. We would have, and this is one of our questions, is politically, well, if you look at the raw numbers, we would have been seeing even stronger growth, we think, year on year. We're just kind of tempering our forecast at the moment because of the uncertainty. But again, generally, growth in the cable sector. We are hearing, I'm sure some of the raw material suppliers here will want to chat about some of the kind of volume increases they're seeing. We're hearing numbers of sometimes plus 20% in some markets. I'm sure there are people here who might even give you some higher numbers in their particular sectors in Europe, particularly related to CPR or particular types of building or power cable. So some very, very strong numbers. And again, maybe in the States we were hearing the same of tray cable markets where some of the producers are at capacity and actually looking for either to expand or to maybe talk to Middle Eastern producers who have a bit of spare capacity. Just put this in. This is actually, we normally show this, some of you have seen this before, but it's actually just showing you there are 14,000 cable makers in the world, 8,000 in China. This is expected to shrink. We'll expect to see this consolidate down to between 5,000 or 6,000 over the next 5 or 6 years. I'm sure that one or two people who've been chatting to at the Wire Show think that the Chinese government will be even more aggressive. Of this 8,000, 2,000 are just making UL-type electronic wire. So just to give you an idea of the number of companies. I put this on. This is one of the interesting things in terms of major investment. ZTT has purchased a number of cable plants in Turkey, and they're saying they're going to put a VCV line in. But again, just adds a bit more capacity to Turkey, which is obviously one of the major export hubs in the region. Just thought I'd put this in. This is just the cable demand. You can just see in 2017, Saudi was still one of the largest consuming markets in the world. Can it be sustained at this level? That's a question. If you look at Saudi's GDP, it should really be somewhere down here, but it was going through a phase of fixed investment. And then obviously there's the UAE you can see down there in terms of demand. This is the top 50 in 2016. Obviously, we're compiling the 2017 numbers at the moment. I'm just going to show you, this is obviously Prysmian and the impact of the acquisition of General Cable. So you'll just see, the next slide just gives you an idea of the This obviously will be Nexans. It gives you an idea of the combined revenues of the two groups. Now, how much they can sustain is another question, but this is on the actual kind of paper combined revenues for Prysmian and General Cable. And actually, just to give you an idea, we just thought I'd just show you the footprint. You can just see General Cable has a larger share in North America, but actually in the Europe and the Middle East, the combined group will be quite a significant presence here. And again, not much overlap in Asia Pacific, not much overlap in Latin America. But again, interesting that this actually becomes a key player here in this region. This is the combined revenues. This gives you an idea, kind of 6 billion. Well, this is in the actual supporting data. So again, obviously there were problems with General Cable. It struggled with the financial crisis. But again, it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out over the next year or two. Right, so just having a quick look at the Middle East cable market. This is just, we're going to hear later from an economist looking at the market. But I just thought I'd show you this is the headline PMI. You can just see in Saudi how it's got some relationship with the Brent oil prices. You can actually see sentiment still positive. We could actually show you some of the construction numbers from last year where it really was struggling. But we're starting to see some signs of the Saudi market, more solid demand. I think the main issue is the amount of capacity. A lot of capacity went in, and in the region since kind of 2007 and 8. And those companies are chasing volumes, also chasing volumes in Dubai, etc. So it's having an impact on margins as well. And again, we're seeing some positive signs. But again, I think the problem there really is there's a lot of issues in politics and strange government decisions in terms of tariffs, etc. So there are issues with Saudi, political issues that are, we think, constraining fixed investment from the private sector. So again, it's really going to be supported by government investment. This is the Dubai. We're going to see later in a later presentation looking at detail in the economics. But again, you can just see we're above 50 purchasing manager index. And actually volumes, as people are telling us, volumes have been okay in Dubai specifically. Abu Dhabi's a bit weak. But again, it's the margins. Margins are under pressure from a bit of competition. But we think with the Prysmian General Cable merger, that's going to take a little bit of with a bit of consolidation, maybe take some of the pressure off in some of the markets. That'll be something that we're looking at over the next few months. So that's a quick run through of the cable industry. And this is just a quick look at some of our publications. And thank you for your attention. So any questions? Okay. So what we're going to do now is we are now going to move on to an interview with Mr. Hamid Al-Ziani, who is actually president of the Arab Cable Manufacturers Association. I'm just going